Night had already fallen when the patrol car pulled up in front of the hardware store after an anonymous tip. Officer Harper Blake, young and tough, spotted a 74-year-old man crouched near the fence. "Drop it now! Hands on your head!" she shouted, her grip steady on the gun. Frank Mitchell slowly raised his hands, startled, trying to explain that he was only looking for something he had lost earlier that day. She didn't believe him, but she was about to find out that this man carried a story powerful enough to change her life forever. Frank Mitchell stood still, his hands raised above his gray head. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice came out calm. "Officer, I'm not doing anything wrong. I dropped something here earlier." Harper Blake kept her stance, gun in hand, eyes fixed on the old man. Her partner, Torres, approached from the side, also on guard. "What's that story?" "The store is closed," Harper said, suspicion clear in her voice. "I know it looks strange." Frank took a deep breath. "But I came here this afternoon to buy a few parts. When I got home, I realized I had lost my dog tag. It's very important to me." Torres frowned. "Your dog tag?" "Yes, I served as a SEAL." Harper let out a dry laugh. "Of course you did." Frank felt his chest tighten. It wasn't the first time someone doubted his military past. Age had changed his body a lot, and few believed that this frail man had once served in the Special Forces. "May I show you my ID?" he asked politely. "Slowly," Harper ordered. Frank lowered one hand carefully, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. Torres stepped closer to take it, examining the documents. "Frank Mitchell, 74 years old," he read aloud. Harper wasn't convinced. "This doesn't say anything about being military. Anyone can make up a story to gain sympathy." Some neighbors had started gathering on the sidewalks nearby. The scene was drawing attention, and Harper knew she needed to resolve it quickly. "Listen, Mr. Frank," she said in an authoritative tone. "Even if your story is true, you can't be trying to enter private property. I understand, but if you would just—" Frank tried to explain, pointing discreetly to the metallic glint on the ground near the fence. "That's enough," Harper cut him off. "You're coming with us to clear this up at the station." Frank closed his eyes for a moment. "All right," he said, resigned. "But I can assure you I haven't done anything wrong." Torres looked at Harper with a questioning expression, as if he thought it unnecessary to take the old man to the station. But she had already made up her mind. "We'll sort this out in the proper place. Let's see if you really were a SEAL," she said, holstering her gun and cuffing the old man. "To the car." Frank got into the patrol car, feeling the weight of the neighbors' curious eyes. In the back seat, he looked out the window at the hardware store. His dog tag was still there, faintly shining under the streetlight. That small piece of metal carried decades of memories and meant more than Harper could imagine. The station was busy for a late evening. Some officers were processing minor incidents, while others worked on reports. Harper led Frank to a desk in the intake area. "Sit there," she ordered, pointing to a plastic chair. Frank obeyed, observing the room. Harper grabbed an incident report form and began filling in the basic information. She typed with irritation, as if this were a waste of time. "All right, I've got your name. You lied about serving where again?" "I didn't lie, young lady. I served in the United States Navy, Navy SEALs." The sound of typing stopped completely. Harper dropped her hands on the keyboard and burst into laughter, drawing the attention of other nearby officers. "I may be young, but I've seen it all here. Last month a guy got arrested claiming he was CIA." Torres stepped closer to the desk, uncomfortable with how Harper was handling the interrogation. "Harper, maybe we should check this more carefully." "Check what?" She cut him off. "Waste of time. Just another guy trying to be clever. I'm sick of it." "To the officer, I can understand your suspicion," Frank said in a calm voice. "But I'm not making anything up. I served my country for 32 years. Harper went back to typing, ignoring his words. "All right then, tell me the whole story. What exactly did you do in the SEALs?" Frank took a deep breath. He knew there was no point going into details. Harper had already made up her mind and wasn't willing to change it. "Special operations," he answered simply. "What kind of operations?" "Classified." Harper laughed again. How convenient, everything's always classified, right? The station buzzed with activity, but Frank felt as if he were alone at that desk, once again facing someone's disbelief, judged only by his appearance. He looked at his wrinkled hands resting on his legs. Those same hands had once held weapons on battlefields, saved comrades' lives, and carried out missions few could imagine. But here, in this moment, they were just the hands of an old man suspected of attempted break-in. Harper finished filling out the basics and leaned back in her chair, studying Frank with a mix of impatience and disdain. "Well, Mr. Frank," she said with a mocking tone, "let's see what the system has to say about this glorious military past of yours." She turned the monitor, starting to type Frank's full name into the database. Torres stayed by her side, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Frank just waited in silence, knowing exactly what Harper was about to discover. Harper typed his full name into the system, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The screen loaded for a few seconds, then the information began to appear. Her eyes scanned the first lines: Frank Henry Mitchell, date of birth, current address. Everything matched the documents. But as she scrolled down, her expression changed completely. The mocking smile vanished from her face. "What the hell?" she muttered, leaning closer to the monitor. Torres noticed the shift. "What is it?" Harper kept reading in silence, her eyes widening. On the screen appeared an impressive list of military decorations. Silver Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross, Bronze Star Medal. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself. Torres leaned in to look at the screen. My God. She scrolled further, revealing more details of his service record. Operations in Vietnam, classified missions, multiple commendations for bravery in combat. Harper's voice faded into a whisper. She looked at Frank, then back at the screen, as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Torres spoke softly. "Harper, this man is a war hero." Frank kept his calm posture, though inside he felt both relief and sadness. Relief that his story had finally been confirmed. Sadness that his word had been doubted. Harper stayed silent for long moments, staring at the screen. Other officers began gathering nearby, curious about the commotion. "What's going on here?" asked Sergeant Cooper, Harper's superior. Torres pointed at the monitor. "This gentleman we brought in, he wasn't lying about being military." Cooper leaned over the screen. "Navy SEAL? Looks like you were one of the best." Frank finally broke the silence. "May I speak now?" All eyes turned to him. Harper nodded, clearly embarrassed. "I really was just looking for my dog tag," Frank said calmly. "I had no intention of causing trouble." "Mr. Mitchell." Cooper stepped forward with a respectful tone. "I'm sorry for this misunderstanding." Harper was still staring at the computer screen, processing the information. 32 years of military service, multiple decorations, an impeccable record. Torres shook his head, impressed. "And we thought you were trying to break in." Cooper turned to Harper. "Blake, I need a word with you." They stepped aside a few feet, but Frank could still hear the tense conversation. Cooper was clearly unhappy with how Harper had handled the situation. "You didn't properly check his ID," Cooper said. "You treated a decorated veteran like a criminal." "I didn't know, Sergeant." "That's exactly the problem." Torres came back over to Frank. "Mr. Mitchell, do you still want to recover that dog tag?" "Very much," Frank nodded. "I always carry it with me." "We'll take care of it right now," Torres said, grabbing the phone. "I know the store owner. He lives nearby." While Torres made the calls, Harper returned to the desk, visibly shaken. She sat across from Frank, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Mitchell," she began hesitantly. "I'm sorry." "No need to apologize for that," Frank said gently. "But you do need to understand that we all get older. We all change. The man I once was is still here inside. Don't judge by appearances." Torres hung up the phone with a satisfied look. "Got it. The owner will open the store for us." Frank smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. "Really?" "We're heading there now," Cooper decided. "Blake, you're going with them, and this time you'll do it right." Harper stood up, still embarrassed. "Yes, sir. On the ride back to the store, the car was quiet. Frank looked out the window while Harper drove, lost in thought. Torres tried to break the silence. "Mr. Mitchell, where did you serve in Vietnam?" "Several regions," Frank replied. "Mostly Da Nang and Saigon." "Must have been tough." "It was," Frank nodded. "But it also taught us a lot about responsibility, about protecting our brothers." As they talked, Harper kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Frank speak. They arrived at the hardware store, where Mr. Barnes was already waiting with a friendly smile. In his hands, he held a metallic object. "I found this," he said, handing it over to the officers. The metal shone under the streetlight. Frank received his dog tags from Harper's hands and held them carefully, as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. He slipped them into his shirt pocket and turned to the officers. "Thank you so much for helping me get this back," he said sincerely. "It means a lot to me." Torres smiled. "It was the least we could do, sir." Harper stayed silent, still processing everything she had learned. Frank noticed her silence and stepped closer. "Officer Blake," he said softly, "we all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." She looked at him, and for the first time she saw not the suspect she had arrested, but the man he truly was. When they returned to the station to finish the paperwork, Harper quickly filled out the release forms. Frank signed the necessary documents and prepared to leave. "Mr. Mitchell," Harper called as he reached the door. "Have a good night." Frank nodded and walked out of the station, moving slowly down the lit sidewalk. Harper stood watching until he disappeared around the corner, a strange feeling rising in her chest. She didn't know it yet, but that night would change far more than she could imagine. Harper arrived home 2 hours later, still replaying the events of the night in her mind. She parked in the garage and sat in the car for a few minutes, reflecting on how she had treated Frank Mitchell. The house was silent when she walked in. She tossed her keys on the kitchen table and went straight to the couch, feeling the weight of the day. That's when she heard the familiar sound of a key turning in the front door lock. "Harper, you here?" A familiar voice called down the hallway. "I'm in the living room, Dad," she answered, surprised by the unexpected visit. Robert Blake, a 68-year-old man with gray hair and a still upright posture, walked into the room carrying a paper bag. "Brought those cookies you like," he said, lifting the bag. "I was nearby and thought I'd surprise you." "Thanks, Dad. Sit down." Robert settled into the armchair next to the couch, noticing the tired expression on his daughter's face. "Rough day at work?" Harper sighed. "You have no idea. Want to talk about it?" Harper hesitated. Normally, she didn't bring work problems home, but something about that night weighed heavily on her. "Dad, have you ever done something you really regretted?" Robert tilted his head, curious. "Of course, sweetheart, we all have." "Why?" Harper told him the whole story, from the call about a possible break-in to the discovery of Frank's military record. Robert listened in silence, occasionally nodding. "He was a Navy SEAL, Dad. Covered in medals, 32 years of service. And I treated him like a criminal." Robert stayed quiet for a moment, processing the information. "What was his name again?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. "Frank Mitchell." Robert's face instantly went pale. He leaned forward, gripping the armrests. "Did you say Frank Mitchell?" Harper noticed the sudden change in her father's demeanor. "Yes." "Why?" Robert fell silent for several seconds, his eyes fixed on the floor. When he finally looked up, Harper saw tears welling in his eyes. "My God, after all these years. Dad, what's going on? You're scaring me." Robert stood and began pacing the room, running his hand through his gray hair. "Harper, that man, Frank Mitchell. He saved my life when we were serving." Harper felt as if the world had stopped. "What?" "Vietnam, 1970. I was just a private, 19 years old," Robert said, stopping to face her. "Our patrol was ambushed near the Mekong Delta. I lost 5 friends that day. I was wounded hiding behind a tree," he went on, his voice breaking. "The Viet Cong were sweeping the area after us." Tears began streaming down the old man's face. "That's when he appeared like a ghost. He carried me for over a mile to the extraction point." Harper's legs felt weak. Frank Mitchell did that. I took a bullet to the stomach and another in the leg. If it weren't for him, I'd have died in that jungle, Robert said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I never saw him again after that day. Harper sank back onto the couch, trying to process the revelation. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me this? Robert sat down beside her. The war wasn't an easy time for me, Harper. I preferred to keep those memories buried. He paused. But Frank Mitchell, that name stayed carved into my mind forever. Harper buried her face in her hands. My God, Dad. What have I done? Robert pulled his daughter into an embrace. Harper, you didn't know. But I should have treated him with respect no matter who he was, Harper sobbed. You always taught me that. You always said to treat people with dignity. They sat in silence for a few minutes, absorbing the weight of the moment. Dad, would you like to see him again? Harper asked hesitantly. Robert smiled through his tears. Without a doubt, sweetheart. Without a doubt. They talked for another hour, Robert sharing details of that day in Vietnam he had kept to himself for decades. Harper listened to every word, finally understanding the magnitude of what Frank had done. When Robert finally left, Harper remained alone in the living room, staring at an old photo of her father in uniform. He had been just a boy when he left for war, and he came back to be a family man thanks to Frank Mitchell's courage. She thought about the irony. The man who had saved her father's life, making her very existence possible, had been treated by her with scorn and suspicion. The next morning she woke with iron determination. There was a family debt to be repaid, and she intended to settle it personally. At 8 in the morning, she was already at the station, searching the system for his full address. Torres arrived an hour later and found her buried in paperwork. Didn't you go home last night? He joked. Torres, I need a favor, Harper said, ignoring the joke. Can you cover for me today? I have something important to take care of. Of course. Is there a problem? It's a long story. By 10 a.m., Harper was at her father's house. Robert was waiting on the porch. On the way to Frank's house, Robert stared out the window, nervous. Harper drove slowly, just as anxious about the meeting. Frank's house was in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined streets and well-kept gardens. It was a simple, white-painted home with a small front porch. When they pulled up, they saw Frank sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, reading a book. At the sound of the engine, he lifted his eyes. Harper and Robert stepped out of the car slowly. Frank recognized them immediately and stood up, curious. Officer Blake, he said, closing the book. Is something wrong? Harper walked up first, holding something in her hands. Mr. Mitchell, I came to return this. She held out a dog tag to him. Frank frowned, confused. But you already gave mine back last night. This one is different, Harper said softly. This one isn't just yours. It also belongs to the man standing here with me. Frank looked at Robert, who had stopped a few feet away. The two men locked eyes for long moments. Slowly, recognition appeared on Frank's face. My God, he whispered. Bobby. Robert stepped forward. Frank. He quickly came down the porch steps, and the two embraced in the middle of the yard. Harper watched the scene, a lump in her throat. I'm glad you're well, Frank said, pulling back to look at Robert. I survived. Robert smiled through tears. Thanks to you. Mr. Mitchell, Harper said, her voice breaking. I need to apologize. Frank turned to her, still holding Robert's arm. Officer Blake, there's no need. Yes, there is, Harper interrupted. Last night, I treated with contempt the man who saved my father. He taught me to treat all people with dignity and respect. Last night, I failed those lessons. I failed you. Frank looked from Harper to Robert, finally understanding the connection. She's your daughter? He asked Robert. My only daughter. Frank stood silent for a moment, absorbing it. Then he looked at Harper with a kind expression. Bobby, I did what any soldier would do for a brother in arms. But seeing you here, seeing your family, he smiled. It reminds me why it was worth fighting. The three of them stayed on the porch for a while, Robert and Frank recalling the past, Harper learning about friendship and sacrifice. When they finally said goodbye, A deep bond had been forged between them. On the drive home, Robert held his daughter's hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Why? I made a mistake." "Because you had the courage to make it right. Because you chose to be better." Harper smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. In the months that followed, Frank and Robert became close friends, meeting weekly to fish and talk. Harper joined them whenever she could. A year later, when Harper was promoted to sergeant, she made sure Frank was present at the ceremony. In her speech, she spoke about the importance of treating every person with dignity, because true heroism isn't only found on battlefields, but in the courage to admit our mistakes and choose to be better every single day. In the end, all of us have the chance to be the hero in someone else's story. Sometimes by saving a life, sometimes simply by recognizing the value of the person standing right in front of us. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.